Welcome to our webcast, 4 Key Trends CFOs Should Know About to Build Finance Teams for the Future. Brought to you by Argyle, publisher of CFO Magazine and CFO.com, and sponsored by XCM Solutions. I'm Joe Fleischer, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few features of the console that you're viewing. On the left side, you'll be able to view slides and respond to polling questions, and in a moment, I'll go over how you would respond to polls. You'll also be able to download a PDF document comprising slides from our webcast by clicking on the link to download slides in the resource list icon area within your console. Although we will plan to dedicate the latter portion of our webcast to addressing your questions, we do invite you to type in your questions and comments at any time during our webcast in the Q&A area of your console. Now, those who join our live webcast will have the opportunity to earn a certificate representing 1 continuing professional education or CPE credit. To be eligible, we ask that you respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions we will intersperse throughout our webcast. And when we display a polling question, we do ask that you select the radio button that corresponds to your answer and then click on the Submit button so that we can record your response. At the end of our webcast, if you've answered at least 3 polling questions during the course of our live webcast and are therefore eligible to receive credit, you will be able to click on an icon to download the certificate located in the certification section of your console. And if you're not able to retrieve your certificate during our live webcast, but you are eligible, you will be able to do so when this webcast is available on demand later this week within the webcast section of CFO.com. I'd like to tell you about our very distinguished guest, Mike Sabbatis, Chief Executive Officer with XCM Solutions. Mike has extensive experience leading fast-paced, customer-focused organizations that develop forward-looking technologies designed to disrupt the norm while sustaining long-term profitable growth. He is a leader, investor, and trusted board member of software, technology, and information services companies that achieve exceptional financial and operational results. And in addition to leading XCM Solutions in his role as CEO, he's also a current board member of XCM Solutions as well as other organizations. And I would note he has held a variety of senior level roles. You can see these here on this slide. And also, I would note for those of you who follow basketball, particularly the Cavaliers, he graduated from Cleveland State University with a degree in accounting, and he is a member of the National Association of Corporate Directors. At this stage, it is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Mike Sabbatis, once again, Chief Executive Officer with XCM Solutions. Please give a warm welcome to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that introduction. And for those of you following my Cavaliers, it's been a rough go in the playoffs, but that's life, right? At least we got there. So today, what I want to talk through is a couple of the trends that are really hitting us. I'm going to cover kind of 4 areas here. First, we'll talk a little bit about capacity and how companies are dealing with that. We'll touch base on risk and some of the areas that we have to be concerned in, the risk area. And then finally, we're going to finish up with collaboration and then the area of waste and how waste impacts an organization, especially financial organizations today. So we'll cover all those pieces as we go forward. A little bit about XCM just to get started, maybe what qualifies us to talk with you today about, about these trends. First off, we've been around for about 15 years, and we have a passion for productivity. Everything we do in our business is always driven around productivity, and we focus on really kind of 3 legs of the stool. We focus on people and how to drive productivity there, processes and how to improve them, and then the technology surrounding that. And if we do that equitably well, then we know we can drive increased levels of productivity. As an organization, our DNA is all around tax, accounting, finance, audit, and the operations areas in that. I mean, I'm an accountant by degree. I've spent the better part of my career working for companies that, such as Wolters Kluwer, where we did a lot of tax and accounting work, Thomson Reuters as well, in addition to XCM. So I make up one piece of this, but if you look at all our employee base, we've got a boatload of accountants who work for us, and that's, again, our focus. Got a little over 500 customers with a little bit of a global presence there, more than 33,000 users of our system. We happen to enjoy a really good relationship with the top 300 CPA firms. where we have over 35%. And those are the companies, the firms that really deal with a lot of the corporations, in which we also enjoy some really great relationships with companies that are north of 50 billion, down to small to medium enterprises who leverage XCM solutions. We're also the only product endorsed by the AICPA for business process and workflow. So we enjoy a nice long-term relationship with the AICPA as well. Right now, we process millions of tasks annually. And so we see that as something that's continuing to grow against this base we have. We operate in a browser device and operating a system agnostic environment. So you can work anywhere, anytime, on any machine, anywhere in the world. And with really scalable technology. And the payback that we generally hear from our customers is greater than 10%, and with a return on investment in well less than a year. So we enjoy this. Again, we try to focus, again, all about productivity, and when we look at that, that really impacts the trends that we're going to talk about. So this brings us to the first polling question. So Joe, I turn it back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. This is the first of 4 polling questions we will pose throughout our webcast. What we want to find out is what key business challenges keep you up at night. We do ask that you select from one of the following choices, and from top to bottom, the choices are tracking and managing projects, due dates and deliverables, keeping track of rapidly changing priorities and resource allocation, no visibility to upstream work coming down the pipe, ensuring I meet my deadlines and can proactively see as well as address bottlenecks, and probably for a small minority, I sleep the night worry-free. What you're welcome to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer. And then what we ask is that you click on the submit button so we can record your response. What we will do is give you just a few more seconds to respond so we have appropriate requisite number of respondents. Once again, we ask that you select the radio button that corresponds to your answer so we can record what key business challenges keep you up at night. And again, we ask that you choose answer that does apply to your organization. And we'll give you maybe one more second to respond, and then we will reveal how you have responded and indeed what we can readily see. And this is pretty interesting, a plurality have indicated keeping track of rapidly changing priorities and resource allocation. I'd like to turn it over to Mike to comment further on these findings.
Yeah, so this aligns with a lot of the research that we do. We have an annual productivity survey that we've been running now for a few years. And one of the areas that we see based on last year's, which ended in the beginning of 2018, is that we saw a lot of focus on deadlines and flexibility. So I think when you look at the high priority here of keeping track of rapidly changing priorities and resource allocation might be one of the most difficult challenges. And I'll actually touch base on that in our case study later in the meeting. So ironically, it kind of aligns with that. Certainly, one of the challenges we all have, I've worked in a number of public companies, but also private as well, but we still have deliverables, due dates, and projects that are beyond just the statutory due dates that we have to meet, and that tends to put a lot of pressure on us as well. But I would say, too, just in my business alone, the changing priorities, I've already had them this morning. I started my day early. I had a couple meetings, and I've already had to change some of the priorities for the day. It just seems to be the pace of business that we're in today. So it's a good insight here. For those of you who sleep worry-free, congratulations. I hope to get there one day. So let's move forward and talk a little bit about capacity. One of the biggest challenges that most of us face is getting all the work completed and getting it completed timely and getting it completed accurately. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, lost time is never found again. And it's so true. And so when we think of creating capacity, how do we do that? When we think of creating more time, we can't really create time, but there is a way to create capacity. And so we've got to find a way to do this. So when we look at this and we evaluate organizations, we look at it in a very multidimensional way. So if you look at this diagram of interdepartmental landscape, we can see this true in almost any organization. At the bottom of the pyramid in the blue boxes where I see individual contributor, You generally have your organizational departments. They could be tax, they could be accounting and or finance, they could be operations, it could be the departments, the lines of business that are out there. But fundamentally, the bulk of the work that gets done by these individual contributors. So they're an enormous part of the pyramid, and they're an enormous part of creating capacity. Above them might be one of the toughest jobs in business today, and that's that level of mid-level management. It could be anywhere from a senior manager to a director to a VP. They're kind of the go-between between the individual contributors and the C-level executives and senior leaders in the business. And what I say is that the reason I say it's such a challenge is that they tend to get caught in the middle. Almost like a tennis match. You're either at the net or you're at the baseline, but when you're in the middle, that's when the challenges really occur. So they have to manage the expectations of the individual contributors, manage the work, and manage the productivity there. But they're also responsible for reporting back to senior leadership, effectuating the strategies developed by senior leadership down through the organization, dealing with difficulties and change management, but yet still a very critical path in the success of an organization. Certainly at the top, I think everybody gets this. At the C-level, they're really chartered with setting the course of the organization, setting the pace of the organization, and really supporting all the things necessary to move the organization forward. The critical role that sometimes gets missed in all of this, I'll call it operations, and operations is a lot of different organizations. It could be your HR team, it could be your IT team. Oftentimes when we look at accounting organizations inside of business, there's operations personnel chartered with driving technology. So I work with a lot of tax departments, and there's usually a tax technologist who may not be doing the actual tax work, may not be doing even the accounting work, but what they are doing is they are managing the technologies, resources, third-party requirements that make the business run effectively. And so this collaboration and this gelling together of all three of these pieces of the organization are critical to an organization's success, and also critical to understanding capacity needs. So when we think of what decreases capacity, it's a fairly easy equation. It's increased workload plus dysfunctional process management, and that creates bottlenecks. And the bottlenecks is what hampers really capacity. Now, underneath that, there's a lot more things to think about. So when you think of increased workload, in our organizations, we see a lot of regulatory requirements and change. We certainly saw that with tax reform this year. We see that in banking with some regulation easing, if you will. But change is change, and whether it's positive or negative for your organization, you've got to deal with it. Business growth initiatives. I know that my organization, we embarked on a new initiative, and that increased the workload for our organization. Certainly getting things done faster. So you've got the compression of work, and then unfortunately, when errors occur, you've got rework. And then I don't know if any of you have been involved in M&A work, but I've been involved with it. I think I've been involved in more than 30 acquisitions through my career, many of which I led. M&A work can create a lot of stress on any business. And so that's where increased workload, and in the accounting, finance, audit areas of corporations, there tends to be a huge amount of pressure here. On the process side of it, I'll take a little different look. Oftentimes, lack of clarity and expectations really impedes business process. It's something very easy to do, but very often doesn't get done. Sometimes there's ineffective processes or outdated processes. If you look at what you might have done a decade ago, it might have been an excellent process, but it doesn't apply in today's world. Technology changed, people changed, education changed, the type of worker that's coming into the environment changes. Probably something that you can all understand is, excess meetings, excess email, and excess Excel. As accountants, Excel has probably been one of the most empowering products you could ever have, but it's still fairly manual. Very hard to distribute. And so when we look at that along with emails and meetings can create havoc on anybody and does create some level of dysfunction. And then certainly there's always manual process management. So when you put those together and we start to see bottlenecks occur, this is where really capacity gets challenged. And so we've got to find ways to address that. When we think in terms of better business process, this is really where another leg of the stool starts to work. We have to think in terms of business process as essential. And while there's several options available that we start to see, probably the most familiar I'm with that I deal with day to day is Lean Six Sigma. And really the basis of Lean Six really comes to a project they call the DMAIC process. So if you know about it, that's great. If you don't, it really talks about defining, measuring, analyzing, improving, and controlling. So all of my implementation teams are Lean Six certified. We have a number of people in the business because we're a business process company. So we eat or drink our own champagne, if you will, or eat our own dog food. So we live by this internally, but we see this hitting the financial industries even harder than ever before. I mean, it used to be kind of reserved for manufacturing, some for product development and technology, but we're really starting to see a Lean Six approach to the Office of Finance and Accounting. So as we look through that and we start to lean out things like waste and eliminate bottlenecks, this is how we know we can enable an evolving organization and really drive productivity to its highest level. And again, it's another critical leg of the stool. So that brings us to our next polling question.
Thank you very much, Mike. And this is indeed the second of 4 polling questions we will intersperse throughout our webcast. And this question asks, and this follows up on Mike's earlier discussion, where you spend the majority of your time today. And what you're welcome to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer, then click on the submit button so we can record your response. And from top to bottom, the choices are managing technologies to meet business objectives, interacting with people to meet business objectives, business process management and compliance, reporting, that includes data collection, validation, and analysis, or all over the board, dealing with the crisis of the day. What you're welcome to do, once again, is select the radio button that corresponds to your organization, specifically where you spend the majority of your time today in working for your organization. Then what we ask that you do is click on the submit button so we can record your response. And we'll give you just one more second to respond, and then we will reveal how you have responded, and Mike will offer some commentary on your responses. And what we can clearly see is that among respondents, this is interesting, a plurality, more than a third have indicated all over the board. So Mike, what are your thoughts on this collection of responses?
This really aligns with our past reviews as well. Before I was going to get here, the crisis of the day and that we're all over the board, it seems to be the environment we're in. The 37% really aligns. We had actually 38%, so we're right on course there. The next time it's one in our surveys, we're interacting with people to meet the business objectives, so that aligns here as well. But when I think about this, the all over the board, I've been the root cause of that. As running organizations, I've gotten out of meetings and I've talked to my team and, done a 180 on them. Not intentionally, not, in a mean way, but, in order to meet a business objective, we've just had to turn on a dime. And I think you're seeing that no matter how big your organization or how small your organization, speed is critical. And along with that causes some crises. And, as an executive, you're expected to get things done, right? You're expected to meet the demands of your shareholders, your employees, your customers. And that oftentimes means changing things up quickly to make things happen. But it also puts an undue pressure on us sometimes. So this aligns really well, Joe, with some of the insight that we've seen before. What I find interesting is that the managing technologies to meet business objectives was really, really low, probably because these other ones overseed it. But that's usually in the range of about 8 or 9%. It's always lower, but it's usually a little higher. So this is good insight, and appreciate that. We'll include that as we go forward. So let's look at risk a little bit. Let's face it, everyone's dealing with some level of risk in their business. Again, no matter how big or small. I happen to chair our risk committee, and I know I spent more than 90 minutes today doing our monthly review. We touch on things like security, infrastructure, data, and data reliance. We hit on governance, the controls we put in place and the protocols that are there. We review procedures and policies that are in place. And then finally, we test and we measure responsiveness of our system, capabilities, any kind of threats that we may see. Our customers may not see them, but we're constantly looking at them. So when we think of risk in our business, we think of it from a number of different ways. You think of it from the environmental side of it, because we have offices all over the world, some in areas that have had, some natural disaster scenarios. They're in areas, but, we were fortunate not to have anything bad happen. But we still have to be aware of it. And then we have cyber risk we have to deal with. It's higher and higher on everybody's list. But even with all the process that we put into it, we still need to maintain what I would call a level of realism. So we must always be aware and vigilant that risk could occur, no matter how well we've prepared for it. So I assume you do the same. You probably have people focusing on this every day. And even though you have that, there's no guarantee that you'll be there. Certainly there's safeguards, though, that we can put in place. So risk is an area that we always want to talk about as well. So when we look at risk, EY recently put out a survey, and they were looking at tax material weaknesses as part of this survey, but what's the root cause of risk? And one of the things that they identified was that 50% of the material weaknesses they found really were driven by a lack of review, a lack of personnel, or poor process execution. And that's a huge percentage when you look at it. Oftentimes when you dug deeper into this, people looked at the insufficient resources. And, I do a lot of work looking at companies like Robert Half who follow the accounting and finance area, and resource needs are critical in every business. And I would say this, it's relative, right? I don't know that we've ever had enough resources to get all the work done. That said, there are ways to make those resources more productive, which is usually what senior management comes down and tells you, right? There's a better way to get these things done. But 75% of the respondents here said they had insufficient resources for their functions. 64% really had insufficient internal communication. So when I look at the interdependencies of getting work done, and I'll just use a tax return in this case, you've got to start a business return with a trial balance. I mean, to take it down to its essence. That trial balance is usually prepared by a different part of the organization, maybe external staff in some cases. So we start to look at those interdependencies, and if the communication is poor, it really starts to create bottlenecks. And then the last thing they cited that I thought was important for this conference was the lack of process or technology, that 57% came back and responded to that. Now, technology doesn't fix everything. I use the term paving the cow path as a lot of what technology brings to the table. We continue to do the same business process. We use the same, end game, if you will. And we put this new technology in. It really doesn't do anything new or good for us. It just puts another burden on all the individual contributors to use a different piece of technology. So when I think through this and assessing the side of risk, where does business process come in and technology in minimizing risk? And I think we have to think through that really hard as you go and embark on making a better business and a better department for yourself. I think EY brings some good insight here. From the standpoint of, custom processes and the things that we start to look at, we always think of business process management and the people process and technology side of it as one. And, that's kind of what this diagram somewhat talks about. When we focus on this, we look at what are the requirements for work. So when we do a business process map with our customers or, with some of our consultants, we look at what the work requirements are. We look at the resources that are really necessary to get this done and try to plan those out. We look at what controls we want to put in place, and then we look at these interdependencies, all as critical parts to it. And along the way, depending on which organization you represent, we look at all projects, tasks, and due dates that are out there. And sometimes those are done independently, and project management is much different than business process management. We think of resource availability, and I ask this question: how many times have you been asked to do something even though you're at 100% capacity or more in some cases? We look at risk around centralizing the tracking of this, optimization of the business process, and how do we follow this established process versus actually building new processes that are more streamlined against either the technologies, the resources we have, or the business need. And I've already talked a little bit about the interdepartmental workflows that have to be built between organizations. But as you start to look upstream and what impact that has to you, and you start to look downstream and what impact that has to people, organizations, or other elements, these are all critical parts of customizing a business process. And I would maybe caution against one thing. Because you have a business process, it was taught a long time ago that it's always good to reassess periodically. Even if it means you just check the box and said, yes, this is still working well. But oftentimes you might see things that aren't working as well. So when we do a business process map, this gives what I would call somewhat oversimplified, but a really high level of how we think of business processes. And I have two examples here that we use. But what I want to really point to in this case is, we've got multiple steps in getting a tax return done in this case. From, getting the information in to the filings, completion, having Treasury cut the checks necessary to pay that. But inside of this, there's a number of things that we like to look at and question when we build a business process. So certainly if we set these, 7 or 8 steps up, the big questions we start to ask is, do we need some level of sign-off? Is there something required in here from a compliance, a regulatory, a legal standpoint that requires some level of sign-off? So in banking, we see that quite a bit in the investment levels. There's so much regulatory compliance requirements there. So we start to see a lot of that. But, from an accounting standpoint, what's required for a sign-off and what can move through with general review. The other thing we start to look at is what kind of checklists are required to get work done. And I would point this in one direction for you. If you've been doing the same work for 20 years, there's a good chance that you wake up every day and you know exactly what has to be done. But turnover and new employees are something that come at us every day. And so one of the biggest challenges that I witness in many organizations and have witnessed in my own organization is that bringing and onboarding of a new employee. And so often we get caught up in, I know how to do it, so I'm just going to get it done. And we don't really leverage the talent of this new employee coming in. So things like checklists and those types of areas are great opportunities to tell people how to do things. And even though I've got an accounting degree, or I may have been in finance or tax forever, I may not have been in your accounting or finance and tax organization. So I'm not going to do it your way, even though at the end result, the regulations tell us how to get things done. You may have different methodologies for that and different, requirements for reporting and recording. This is where kind of checklist items come in. And then there's this cycle back, so that last piece, and I'm in the bottom left-hand side here, but then there's this, complete and wrap-up step. So there's always this interaction. I look at it very simply, if I'm going to review the tax return that we have to file, I'm going to look at any remittances we need to have from a sales tax standpoint. I'm going to look at the nexus we have and try to understand what we've done in a clear enough way that I can lead the organization, but also in a way that we have the assurances that I can assure my investors that we're doing the right thing and that we won't be surprised by anything, which is, one of the things you have to do as a leader. So we look at this tax workflow best practices as one area we spend a lot of time in with our customers. Second area I look at is budgeting and forecasting, and then framework. So, within my organization and actually all my organizations, we do our budgets and then we do a monthly forecast and reforecasting of numbers. So our budget essentially breaks after month one. And it can break in for good reasons and for bad reasons. It could break because we're ahead of the game. And if we're ahead of the game, that actually defines the amount of investment we may choose to put into the organization because we're ahead of the game. If we're behind the game, then we're making adjustments and trying to shore things up. But no different than the tax business process I put in. We put in some very similar things. Again, sign-offs, requirements, things of that nature, checklists that we might have, and whatever our business process is to disseminate the information necessary to do the budget, and then bring it back and aggregate it so that we can actually make the business decisions, lock and load for the year. But this is just another element of some business process that you should be thinking about in your organization. And we'll talk a little bit about collaboration in a minute. So these are two good examples of just the budget framework, or budget and tax framework. So one of the biggest challenges in any organization, and I've seen it, at all levels, is exchanging information, and and really trying to get your message out, which all goes back to collaboration, and how do we collaborate effectively. So when we start to think of how we collaborate, one of the biggest business challenges we have is how do you get out of the vacuum? How do you get out of your silo, if you will? Because silos aren't necessarily bad. Sometimes silos are good because they're very focused and they give you the ability to get the work done. The bad part about them is so often our head is so far down that we really don't know what's happening around us and we don't see the greater impact to the business. So collaboration is kind of a critical path. Now here's a good example of what we see in tax and accounting and the work that really gets moved around. And I can make it more complex than this, but it's pretty simple when we look at these 14 different touch points. You've got your entities and your business unit managers and starting in the upper left-hand side, and somehow they need to start pushing information back to what I'll call operations, and that could be your finance or accounting team, it could be your tax team, it could be both. And then that interaction starts to occur from leadership, between leadership and the team required for this. So in this case, if you think of in terms of a tax return, or tax returns going through your organization, you could see the movement, the back and forth, and gathering the information, ensuring that it's done right, having somebody prepare that information, giving it back to a reviewer, and the cycles that go through that. And I'm thinking of a large consolidated return, potentially multiple tiers, with federal, state, and local taxes that all have to be done, that are done by different people in a concurrent method. So you can start to really see the complexities in this and the interactions that have to occur and the decisions that need to be made. So when we look at this, we like to call this our spaghetti chart, because that's just how business processes work. We think we can find ways inside of a business process like this to really start to streamline things. And I'll touch base on that right now. So when you look at it from an interdepartmental drivers, the one thing we see is changing priorities, and this is where the silos start to hurt us. If I go down to my accounting organization and turn them 180 degrees, and that impacts movement of data to another organization that's dependent on it and has scheduled resources and time, and oftentimes that can be external resources that are coming in that are costly, that creates issues for us, and that's an area that we want to touch on as we look at how do we manage the priorities that are always changing. We can't stop them from happening, but we can certainly manage them better. The second thing that we see quite often is inflexible business processes. I'll give you a feel for it. I worked for a very large company. We were a tax processing company. We collected data on all of the income tax elements across the entire United States, so thousands of forms. And we did this for 30 years in a way and a methodology that was very rigid, very complete, but we had to be accurate. We had what I would call a millennial today come in, take a look at our business process, and actually take a step back and say, you know what, we could do this a different way. Your business process is inflexible, it's outdated, and basically applied technology to the business process. The end result is we were able to reduce the headcount required to get this done by 17 heads. It was $2.1 million to the business. So by taking an inflexible business process, listening to somebody who really had the technology background and resources, and applying that, we were able to reinvest $2.1 million into something more productive. Something better for our customers and something better for our business because we weren't inflexible. The third thing that we see is lack of visibility across these siloed departments. So when you have lack of visibility, what do? You have a meeting. so you can gain visibility. And you probably have all been in these meetings. We have status meetings all the time. Typical executive is in 62 meetings a month. Through other surveys, of those 62 meetings, when you look at the hours spent, they've said they've spent 31 hours in useless meetings. So almost a week of their time you're sitting in meetings that aren't of value to you, but you're there. The other thing that happens in our workforce is we've got more workers working remotely, and certainly across multiple locations. So we have to be able to address the needs of workers beyond the borders of our own office. And not everything is in a shared service site or a central location. I might have to depend on an accountant in a particular division that's way outside of my area, or in another country for that matter. I've worked for a number of global companies, and we had operations everywhere that required this. So we had to be able to work remotely, which meant we needed to have business process and technology tools that enabled us to work remotely. So as we look at that collaboration, it's more than just you and I talking. It's more than just you and I meeting. We have to have methodologies out there to help us get work done and collaborate effectively, even if we're not in the same time zone. And I've got offices in India where essentially, our day is their night. We do thousands of tax returns over there ourselves, and we have to be able to effectively communicate with them. So we look at people, process, and technology as a way to do that. That brings us to our next question, our next polling question.
Thank you, Mike. Earlier we had asked attendees what key business challenges keep you up at night. We now want to pose another question to you individually, and that is specifically, in your role, what would you recommend to improve your business? And this is referring to what your opinion is in your senior level role or in your role within your organization. And from top to bottom, the choices are provide more clarity to expectations, and so that's one option, more effectively assign work across staff, keep track of rapidly changing priorities, support employee engagement and retention, develop analytics that support resource utilization, and build more accountability to meet deadlines. We've talked about each of these earlier on during the course of our discussion, and we want to find out what you would recommend to improve your business. What we ask that you do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer, and then click on the Submit button so we can record your response. And what we will do is give you just a few more seconds to respond and to indicate in your role what you would recommend to improve your business. Then what we will do is reveal how you have responded. And what we can see right now in aggregate among the respondents is that a plurality, roughly a quarter, have indicated keep track of rapidly changing priorities. And Mike, I'd turn it back to you. Does this combination of responses dovetail with what you have observed in posing this question previously?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit different. The bulk of the respondents in previous surveys has talked about engagement, actually at 32%. So that's a little different, and that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just a little bit different. And that was usually followed up by more accountability, which is really the bottom one, and then tracking the changing priorities, which happens to be the lead in this one. What I noticed different, though, was this development of analytics that support resource utilization, and I find that fascinating. And the reason I find it fascinating is so often people don't think of resource allocation and utilization as that important. They think about getting the work done. They don't think of the impact it has on the employees. And I do see a direct correlation to that and employee engagement. So these are all, good inputs from that standpoint. Gallup recently did a poll, just thinking of this here, and they found that 70% of employees today are disengaged. So that to me is pretty shocking. It means that 7 out of every 10 of us is disengaged today in our work, which might seem absurd in some areas. But if you go to the water cooler, I call it the digital water cooler today, which is social media, and you read about it, you go to a Glassdoor or someplace like that, you start to see what people think about their business and their organizations and how they work, and you start to see a lot of disengagement. And that's something that has a big impact on business. It impacts the quality of work getting done. It's certainly costly from a turnover standpoint. Some of the HR groups will tell you it costs about 50% of an employee's salary to rehire somebody, and plus you lose the productivity of a longer-term employee as you bring in a new employee, even though they might be a better or more qualified employee. But one of the biggest issues that comes out of this engagement and/or resource utilization would be something I would call a discretionary effort. And we're all here working essentially 9 to 5 is what our goal is, right? Oftentimes we're working many more hours. Some of us work nights, weekends, at home. After dinner, there's so many different work levels. And I know myself, I wind up, getting up early on Saturday and Sunday mornings, get work done just to keep the pace before the rest of my family's up and about. But that discretionary effort is one of the biggest values and benefits to organizations. And when we lose that, we lose productivity. So if I'm willing to put in more time because the work is challenging, because it's rewarding, because I feel I have a purpose, because I feel I can make a difference, well, that changes the productivity of an organization dramatically. Now, if you think of it, if 70% of us are disengaged, and it's not the same 70% every day, I may be totally engaged today, and tomorrow might be a different day for me. But if we can get that discretionary effort up and that commitment back to our organization, our teammates, our business, our products, our customers, however it might be, we can really increase productivity and I think total engagement in the organization. So when I look at these changing priorities as the high one, followed by analytics to support resource utilization, I think I have some interesting things to address this going forward, so I'm glad they came back. So as we do go forward and we talk about effective collaboration, I want you to think in terms of what it would be like to have real-time visibility to everything that's going on in your organization from an accounting, tax, finance area. And this is a good example of something that I'm very familiar with. I've dealt with a number of different business process management solutions in my lifetime here, but this is the one I'm most familiar with. And here's a good example. And if you look in the blue box in the middle, you can see all the different types of things that I might be responsible for today. So this is all the tasks assigned to me in something we call a My View page. And we've got tax provisioning we're doing, we've got filings we're doing, we've got different types of corporations, we've got sales and use, we've got payroll that we're filing, cash flow reports, cost analysis in there, AP analysis, budget creation, a facility model for budgeting, a new loan covenant that I have to deal with. So these are probably things that you're familiar with day in and day out because they continue to come at you. And so how do you keep track of all that if you're that mid-level manager? How do you keep track of that if you're that individual contributor knowing what's expected of you today? And then how do you deal with the different prioritizations that come? This is a good example of how we can help deal with these types of things by really seeing the who, what, how, when, and why that occurs here. And again, these are all, you can drill down from any one of these areas in this particular company. But this tells me today my top priorities are these top 20 things. It might be less than that in another day, but it helps me understand what's key for me to get done. And then at a leadership level, you can see things in an even broader case of all the things possible in an organization across a longer period of time. I can also tell you that if this is me and I've got 20 things to do and these are all in my pile today, I've got a lot of work on my plate. So if you want to assign me one more thing, I would ask you to look at everything else and tell me what I should get rid of, what I should deprioritize. I also might ask you to look at another employee's task list and say, well, how do you compare if you've got other qualified professionals to get the work done? Might we be able to more equitably divide the work to get the work done more effectively? This is one example of it. So the last trend I want to touch base on is really the trend around waste. And, one of the most prevalent issues that we see in business is, professionals that have too much wasted time on their hands. Not something they do purposely. I know it's frustrating when you could be getting some real work done, some valuable work done, but you're stuck in a meeting or something that's not really valuable, or you're working on something that really doesn't appear to have any value to the organization. I'm sure we've all done that before. Or worse yet, you're waiting for something that was promised to you, so you can't even get started. And maybe the most frustrating thing is that when it shows up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 in the afternoon, and you need to get it done by tomorrow morning, what do? You either stay late, so meaning you're missing dinner or drinks with your friends, or you're missing a soccer game with your family, or you're not talking to somebody you wanted to do, or doing something that would be fun for you because you got to get the work done. And in my 30-plus years in business, I've seen finance teams grill it overnight so many times that I can't even count them. So let's talk a little bit more about just kind of waste and the things we see in business. So Seth Godin is an author. He's written a number of different books, and he really talks about a lot of the challenges, but he says it so clearly. We're so busy doing our jobs, we can't get any work done. And so it's hard-hitting, I think, when you think in those terms, but it's so often what happens in business. And we always talk about having our heads down and not looking up to survey what's coming next, but we don't have time to do that in many cases. So what's causing it? Why are we so busy? Well, certainly, I know I set the pace for our organization, so the pace of business continues to increase. Instant gratification is no longer fast enough for customers, for business partners, for shareholders. They want more, and they want it faster. Sometimes there's just an unclear understanding of what the return is on the investment of the work you're doing. But we're still doing all that work. We're always competing, if you will, with what our changing priorities are. And there's always trade-offs that we have to make. If you're in a highly regulated business or particular function, deadlines are non-negotiable. The IRS doesn't negotiate deadlines with anybody. Even when they make mistakes, they don't negotiate deadlines with people. So we have to be aware of the pressure that puts on us and how that leads up to it. I don't know about you, but in our business, we do care about hiring, and we do follow a budget, and there are constraints, and sometimes resources do get stretched a bit. And I'm sure we've all felt that as well. When we think about it, we're sometimes so busy, we don't think about the risk of not investing in something. So it's easy to say, don't spend this money, don't take this time, don't put this effort against something that might improve your business or your productivity because there's a cost to it. But by not investing, sometimes we put more pressure on businesses and actually increase cost and decrease quality. What we see in a lot of surveys is that people we're collecting a lot of data on financials, but we really don't know what our people are doing. And oftentimes, as an individual contributor, I might say the best manager I ever had left me alone and let me do my work. I'd contrast that. The best manager I ever had knew the type of work I was doing, supported me in accomplishing my business objectives and goals, and balanced that with his needs or her needs and the rest of the business, and helped me understand what it meant for me to get this work done. So are we really collecting any information on the people and really looking at their productivity? And then on the bottom line, and I think we're starting to see this more and more, there's less allegiance to corporations now. It's hard to find somebody who spent 30 years someplace. I have a couple of millennial kids. My 30-year-old is on her 5th career, and I commend her for it because she's continued to progress in her multiple organizations. She's well educated. I'm very proud of her, but she's a typical millennial. She's looking for the things that are right for her and not willing to wait for a company to meet her expectations. So she'll find another company that does. And she's worked in big banking, named the big banks, and she's probably worked for them before, and the big financial institutions. But I look at that, and I don't think that's atypical of many of the employees I see in my business today or other businesses as well. And so how do you retain top talent and attract top talent and really get them in the most profitable areas of the organization? But these are the things that are weighing us down and keeping us busy. And anytime there's changes in that, that's where we start to see waste. So I talked about this earlier, but there's a number of things, and we see a lot in the business and finance area around Lean Six Sigma. And the reason we see that is because it's a very repeatable and structured process, and it's relatively easy to implement, relatively easy. When we look at Lean Six and we can start to take out waste, the whole idea behind Lean is taking out waste, and the whole idea between Six is quality, right? So it's leaning out waste and improving quality. That starts to go back and look at how you get your work done. And when you look at your staff, are you getting the right work to the right people? Or do you wind up dumping everything on one person or one group, failing to recognize that you may have other talented people? We really want to always try to look at minimizing bottlenecks, and this is where Lean Six comes in because it identifies very graphically where those bottlenecks are occurring and what the root cause is. We look at things like reviews, sign-offs, and the quality of work, and we try to ensure that we balance what are the regulatory sign-offs and requirements against the excess sign-offs and things like that. And then finally, balancing what's urgent against what's important, and it's something I think that we wind up doing every day. But if we can do that, we can start to eliminate some of the waste that hits businesses pretty hard. So with that, I bring you to the next polling question.
Thank you, Mike. This is our fourth and final polling question. And in this question, we want to ask, compared to 5 years ago, what percentage of your time are you spending on analysis and analytics? What you're welcome to do is select the radio button that corresponds to your answer and then click on the submit button so that we can record your response. And from top to bottom, the choices are the same amount compared to 5 years ago, between 1 and 25, 26 to 50, again, in percentages, 51 to 75, 76 to 100, or if you're not being asked to spend any time on analysis and analytics, you're welcome to select the radio button next to the bottom choice, and after you choose the radio button that corresponds to you, we do ask that you click on the submit button so we can record your answer to the question compared to 5 years ago. What percentage of your time are you spending on analysis and analytics? And we'll give you a second or two to respond, one more second or two to respond. We'll then reveal how you have responded, and then we will wrap up our discussion, and we will plan to leave aside time. I think we have time for maybe one question, a great question from an attendee. But what we will do in the meantime is reveal how you have responded. And Mike, do these responses correspond to what you have seen when posing this question previously?
Yeah, actually they're a little bit slightly higher. In previous surveys, we've seen 80% said that they've increased. So if you look at the 1 all the way to 100, so this is pretty similar. We've seen about 33% hit about between 1 and 25%. This group has it at 26 to 50% of an increase. So we're really starting to see more and more analytics required in businesses. And again, in a data-driven decision-making organization, which seems to be good fundamental business process or business management, we see more and more need for analytics. And more need for analytics are beyond just the financial side of it. Again, we look at it at, analytics around people, around process, around technologies that are in there, and also around how the business runs. So this is good insight, and again, I think it aligns pretty well with what we've seen previously. So technology that we start to see when we look against these 4 areas of capacity, risk, collaboration, and waste, we look at kind of 4 areas that we believe are important to organizations, and that's visibility against everything that you do, having the controls in place so that you can orchestrate work better, having the flexibility to create either business processes or deal with business issues on demand, and then really driving accountability, not from a punitive sense, but from a positive sense and an empowering sense. Understanding that, if I can get my work done, it's better for the rest of the organization, or if I'm depending on another person to give me or group to give me information, they do it timely, they should be rewarded for that. So we look at these areas, and I'll give you a couple examples here when we look at some of the analytics that actually align back to this. Here's a good example of what we do for one of our customers. And we look at all the tasks involved by a company, and then we've actually filtered this analytic down to the particular individual doing the work and compared that individual and their number of tasks, against the entire organization. And, so if you look at this case here and you look at the orange box, this is all the work that's in process for this person. And it talks about 23 tasks, which is 21% of their information. And that aligns pretty well with what the organization has done. But we can begin to slice and dice data on the type of work that people are doing. We can also look at what work they have scheduled in the future. So we have this ability to not only look historically of what's happening, where you stand in the present, but then also to project and predict in the future your availability. And we use this with one of our largest customers, a multinational corporation that I'll talk about here in just a minute. But this is a good example of some analytics we can get out of the system. And I love the Peter Drucker quote: "If you can't measure it, you can't improve it." And it's so true, and it's timeless. Here's a case study. This is a very, very large company, Fortune 500, actually about a Fortune 180 company. They've got a multi-tiered consolidation, a set of global entities. They just acquired another mega company. They've got thousands of reporting requirements. They had 30 internal resources in their tax department, and they have a co-sourcing arrangement with a Big Four accounting firm with another 16 resources presently that are there. So, 46 people dealing with this just in this one area. Their business challenges, I don't believe were unique because we see them constantly, time and time again, but they were utilizing multiple tools and multiple applications to manage their due dates, their compliance, their work assignments, and their resource allocation. They have over 100 different technologies they use in this organization. These point solutions really didn't address their broader set of issues and business requirements, which was really managing the resources to get the work done and understanding where things stood. They had a lot of parallel processes that had to be spun up to meet deadlines. So thinking that in terms of, you've got a multi-tiered consolidation and you're doing the federal tax returns for that, and you've got international provisioning, and you've got state income taxes all being done concurrently and simultaneously. And how do you manage these deadlines? Because they have to converge at a point in time to get the filings done, and then you still have the treasury requirements required for any kind of remittance or something of that nature. They had a lot of manual processes they put in place, but the good news is they put a lot of checkpoints, and those checkpoints were meetings that sometimes were daily, always weekly. They had excessive preparation time for those meetings. This is one of the challenges we see in so many organizations because it can take you sometimes days to get prepared for a status meeting, which means you are not doing real work. And it was impacting their productivity negatively. And then finally, as they continued to grow, they got more and more work requirements that were leveraging their same set of resources. So what we came in and did is we met with them, we went through their business processes, and we started to embark on the solution side of it. So we configured multiple specific business processes to manage all the detailed work they had, ensuring that they had compliance and met it timely. We dealt with all the due date requirements and the statutory filing requirements from all the different types of entities that they had. Every professional in the organization, both their employees and their outsourced staff, those CPAs they hired from the national accounting firm, all had access to the information. So they could see real time where everything stood, what information or business work requirements were coming to them today, tomorrow, and the next week. And they were able to easily move work to the next set in the process. So that helped them create more capacity, which meant they didn't have to hire more people to get the work done or hire more costly outsourced resources, but they were able to leverage the team they had. They had the ability to really divvy up the work functionally between their internal resources and their co-source professionals. So where they needed expertise in a particular area, it was very easy to assign that work. The other thing is, like any company, they had turnover, and they were in a moment's notice able to reassign that work. So what may have taken them a day and a half to look at all the work that I had as a departing employee, and where it might go. They were able to do that literally in minutes because they could just pick the work up and push it from a digitized way to the next person. And they created the ability to measure and analyze and improve the business. So now we're in the third year of this, and what they're starting to see is even more business process improvements. So as they add more businesses together here, they can be more agile as an organization. So really a good case study there, and an exciting time for them. And then, finally, I just want to, leave on that note. Thank you for your time today. If you're thinking about how to deal with this, I'd be happy to talk a little more about it. Certainly if you're interested in talking to XCM a little bit, I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. So, Joe, I turn it back to you, and I thank everybody who attended for your time today. I hope it was informational for you and educational. So have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. I want to acknowledge we've received great questions from attendees. We may not have had the opportunity to address all of these, but we will plan to follow up on any questions after our webcast. Also, this webcast will be available on demand later this week within the webcast section of CFO.com. At that point, you'll be able to view and listen to a streaming archive of our webcast, download a PDF document comprising slides from our webcast, and if you've answered at least 3 of the 4 polling questions we've posed during our live webcast, you'll be able to retrieve your CPE certificate. At the end of our webcast, we invite you to complete an online feedback survey. The survey will appear in a separate browser window that you will be able to view if you've turned off your pop-up blocker within your web browser. As always, we appreciate your feedback. And want to thank once again Mike Sabbatis, Chief Executive Officer with XCM Solutions, for an engaging and informative presentation. And we want to thank attendees for joining our webcast. 4 key trends CFOs should know about to build finance teams for the future, sponsored by XCM. We thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.